Guys, Roland here. Welcome to another episode of the Remember Who You Are show. With me is a familiar guest here to talk about the conversations we've been having, which is part of our mini series on power versus force, particularly Dr. David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness. This is episode number 6, and we'll get to it right after this introduction. The prime directive for every human is to know thyself, which is not a discovery, it's a remembering. And that's the goal for this show, to help you remember who you are. I am your host, Roland Achenjang. Indeed, I am Roland, and with me today is my friend, my mentor, goes by the Energy Doctor, the host of Quantum Effect on Gaia, Randy Veitenheimer. Randy, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, man. Hello.
Indeed. Hello back to you.
Yeah. It's an exhaustive subject, right? In a lot of ways. So here we go. Let's see what else we can find out. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, kudos again to you for agreeing to do this, because you've spent so much time with me. It's like, yeah, we've gotten to know each other pretty well throughout all these conversations.
Sure.
And I really appreciate your insight as always. But I do want to let you know that the comments we're getting and the feedback has been really great. And I think this is good preparation for the folks who are going to be attending your talk in Sedona in October later this year. And it's also good preparation for you, right? To kind of recap.
Oh, yes. Yeah. One of the things about attending all those lectures was, there wasn't a lot of discussion. It's like you'd go to the lecture, after 8 hours of that or whatever, you just wore out. You had been downloaded so much information. And of course, when it was occurring, 2002, 3, right on through that time period, not only was it new information, it was information you didn't have language to discuss very well. It's like there's been a great increase in the amount of actual language and thought that have occurred and expanded, so that you can basically have the conversation. It's one of the things I want to work on people is have you read Power versus Force becomes sort of a prerequisite. I tell them to read that because I don't sound so crazy when I start talking about calibration and levels of consciousness and your participation in each of those areas. And so it provides a good framework. I was talking with a man in Japan today, and they've recently they've released a copy of Power versus Force in Japanese. And I was like, I wonder how that's going to work. In other words, like to introduce this subject is to change yourself. And so we look at that, of course, at an individual level. But what does it do for a society, especially one so coherent as a Japanese society is? To introduce a new thought, to introduce a new idea, can have amazing implications as it goes along, just as it has in my life by virtue of going to those lectures and studying the book and talking to other people. So this is a chance to have a discussion that I would love to have had with people after some of those lectures, right? Instead of going back to the hotel and laying your head down because it hurts so bad. Because it was a lot. It was not only new information, you're trying to integrate it into a new paradigm, a new kind of way of We call it walking in the world. You
Yeah.
know, you walk in the world differently when you have a different base to operate from. And in this case, it's a base of consciousness.
Absolutely. You know, Randy, I want to
So
piggyback off of what you said about the book getting translated to the Japanese language,
right.
and
Hmm.
acknowledging the fact that at least to me, coming from the western part of the globe, right, it seems like a more coherent, like you said, cohesive culture. And in trying to imagine how they're going to change, I don't know if they're going to change much, or is it going to be a validation of some of the stuff they already know and they're working, or is it going to be like for you, and I would say also for me after going through the awakening, a validation of a good way to represent this information that is kind of, traditionally very difficult to express.
Yeah, that's proper language you're using. Um, because one of the things that goes on in Japan is that they, or has gone on, is they have this tremendous history of we'll call it spiritual orientation. And, and so in that respect, this fits right in. And the difference is that it gives you, let's see, it gives you a way to look at it, just look at the world or interact with the world. That is an update of some of the information that they already have and have used for thousands of years. And I call that an integrated model. It's the concepts of Shintoism, which is that you're a part of the earth and the plants and the animals and everything else that goes along with this. Very ancient tradition. Well, it's also the same one Native Americans have. It's also the same one that Africans have in their past before they adopted Western ideas. And so the ideas in Power versus Force go beyond an Eastern or Western. They become just concepts that have been explained individually in different parts of the world throughout history. And the thing I told David one day is that I wanted to use Power versus Force for a commonality of language. Now, I told him, I was in conversation with him, and I said, I would like to use your book. And he said, for a commonality of language. In other words, he supplied the rest of the thought, intuition,
Mm-hmm.
right? And telepathy, whatever you want to call it. So to me, a commonality of language that transcends the idea of Japanese or Afrikaans or, whatever language, the Middle Eastern languages, European languages, we break them all down, but the concepts are still there. The concepts are still there. And so that became my impetus to share it so much, is that if we could have a commonality of language in what we're talking about, then we would have a greater exchange of information and a greater exchange of relating to each other. And so another ego comment I made was that at the very beginning is, "Hey, David, I already know all this."
It's
Great ego
yeah,
position, right? When you're 40 something years old.
yeah.
Anyway, the idea though was that the other half of that comment was, though, thank you for putting it in a format that allows me to utilize the knowledge I've already gained in so many different
Mm-hmm.
disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
That was the rest of the sentence. And I think it's important sometimes to complete the rest of those sentences. Sometimes I don't. But when you have that kind of context, if you heard just the first part, you go, well, what an egomaniac. And if you read the whole thing or hear the whole thing, then it becomes like, wow, right? I can have a commonality language no matter what my background, no matter what my age, no matter where I've come from, and no matter my life experiences on this planet. And if we can talk across consciousness, we have greater relational capacity, is the way I look at it.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
so
Randy, again, it truly is my honor. I never got a chance to meet Dr. David Hawkins or attend one of his lectures. And so for you and I to be able to discuss this, that's
Right.
kind of neat. I'm glad I'm able to fulfill that for you, that, sort of desire. But again, I do,
Hmm.
his lectures are available, right? You can buy the CDs and DVDs, and every now
Yes,
and then I
yes,
go
yeah,
back and I watch them, and yeah, they maybe not right at the beginning, but later on he would have like a Q&A where you would come in and ask one question, and like I said, he would just
oh
answer
yeah,
it
yeah,
in a way that made you feel like, but I already
yeah,
knew that, and
right,
I say
yes,
that to say, when you said I already know all of this, kind of like that ego positionality,
yeah,
but there is some truth to it.
right,
Like we already know this, and this is like, I use the word reminder, right? To remember who you are. Sure, remember this stuff. This is what it means to be a human. This is part of the human experience, is to go through in one way this sort of spectrum of experiences and feelings and states of
mm,
consciousness, and you're constantly moving through them. And he, David talks about this at length in all his lectures. He goes, like, no one is good or bad. It's a spectrum of the same thing, where the higher you go up, which is where we are now in talking about peace, enlightenment, etc., you just have more light, right? Like, he was
yes, yeah,
very clear. I mean, he kind of made it, he sounded like a broken record, right? He said, hey, just so you know, there's no such thing as darkness. It's just the absence of light. Like, you can't bring darkness anywhere, but you can only create
right,
the illusion of a darkness by turning the light off. And he says the lower you go in these levels of consciousness, there's just less light. But it's all one thing.
yes,
um, and so, yeah, with this particular spectrum, there is like a universality to it and a commonality to it. And once you start to get it, yeah, it does make sense. You can, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's it's interesting because what you're saying, because light is on a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
right? And unfortunately, it took autism to introduce the concept of a spectrum I think they use it as intelligence, not so much as consciousness, because I've worked with a lot of autistic children, and they do have consciousness, right? Their spectrum of expression may be different than ours, and that's what we would say. And so, if you use a spectrum of light, you also do a spectrum of energy. And David related that several times over the course about how it's kind of like there's a heat signature with each of these levels of consciousness. And so the registration of heat is another sense that we have, but may not exactly have sense organs associated with it, without getting too technical. So it took autism to introduce the idea of a spectrum of intelligence, or being human, something. And in the same way, we have a spectrum of consciousness. We have a spectrum of light. We have a spectrum of heat. And David related that the algorithmic numbers of the map of consciousness also kind of like have a heat index. Um, it's the higher you go, the more energy you have. The more energy you have, the more you radiate. The more you radiate, theoretically, the more enlightened you are. So that whole concept, um, it gets interwoven in this, and that's why it's not just a book on consciousness. It's a book on physics, particularly quantum physics. It's a book on dimensionality. Um, it's a book that I explain as kind of the first one that is really expansionary. Uh, and what that means is the more you delve into it, the more relational you become to a whole lot more of the universe, if that makes any sense. So,
Of course, yeah.
and I've tried to explain that, like in business people, I give it to business people. If you don't understand these concepts, the chances for opposition, the chances for problems doesn't become greater, but they definitely become lesser if you can apply some of these concepts to who you are and what you're doing and where you've been, right? And it's back to that same idea. So there.
No, you're right. You're right. Yeah. I mean, the problems don't go away. They take on a different sort of role in your life and perspective.
Yes.
And then you talked about, right, the lower levels of consciousness, you become sort of adverse to being there and staying there, right? It's
yes.
like, oh,
Yeah.
I recognize that I'm here and
Yeah.
I can quickly get out. And so,
yes.
in
You're,
go ahead.
No, you're correct.
Yeah.
It's your position changes, if that makes any sense. And in physics, they call it superposition or whatever, but your position in the universe changes. And then in martial arts, we teach it as your stance changes. You go from a really aggressive stance, think about like in some of the martial arts, to one of like in Tai Chi or Qigong, some others, Kung Fu. You go to a very relaxed stance. And that's another aspect of this. If you look at the under 200, the amount of problems you can engage in is tremendous. Okay. But as you go up that scale of consciousness and your own efforts or whatever comes to you, then you find yourself not having to stance so hard at the universe. You don't take such an oppositional approach. And of course, today that comes out as flow language or something they've come up with. But all of this is embedded in power versus force, and especially the progression of consciousness that occurs. I think about like all the different levels. You can find millions of books written on each level, but like I told David, the first time you put it in a framework that I could utilize, that was the rest of the conversation. In other words, I appreciate that you have put all the information that I thought I knew into a framework that allows me to utilize it, like in healing people or helping people or anything like that. So that I'm really, really grateful for. It's impossible to imagine how much change has occurred because of being able to study this and learn from David. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And hey, we'll keep going. We ended the last episode with 540, which is joy. And we talked about how usually when you reset people to being themselves, you take them back to joy.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll move on to consciousness level 600, which is peace.
Uh-huh.
Right? Peace. Yeah. The famous peace be with you, Randy.
It's so you know, we never know if that's a curse or not. So and the concept is real simple, is change is the order of the universe, moment to moment, whatever way you want to get into it. And so peace implies a certain stillness, and of course that's what we find in all the spiritual traditions and everything. In Eastern philosophy, stillness is something to be attained. Okay, it gets transmuted into centeredness, into Hanzo is the Native American term, to be in balance, and Hara in Japanese, to be centered. It just goes on and on and on. And the problem with balance is that the entire universe is not balanced at one level. At another level, it's balanced at every moment, a complete balance at every moment. But then immediately in the next moment, it is unbalanced. And that becomes our literally our way of walking. If you watch a baby learns to walk by being unbalanced. they unbalance themselves, fall forward, catch themselves, and that sort of herky-jerky motion translates out into literally our life and how we approach consciousness. So in the martial arts, we learn to glide, we learn to be smooth, okay, and we call that a smooth transition from moment to moment, from balance to balance, and it's the same thing in quantum physics. So peace becomes something that is, we would say, maybe attainable, but not able to hold on to. It's like, it's not a precept in our universe, I'll put it that way. It's not something you can base your life on. And of course, I love David. One time he was talking about peace, and he said, you know, the only time I've been injured is when I went to a peace march. So, you know, so you go, yeah, those things are extremely violent. You can get hurt if you go to those things, right? Maybe more than going to
do, you,
war. So,
do,
right?
do you know why? You know why I'm laughing at that statement? Because it's like the classic sort of cognitive dissonance that is like the fabric of our reality, right?
Right.
Where things don't make sense. Where it's, I go to a peace march and I get hurt,
Right.
or my mother is a virgin,
Yeah.
right? Like that kind of, you know,
Yeah.
where no amount of reason
Yeah.
can make you. It's just like, wait, what? Why is this so? But you're right though, Randy. I mean, well, I don't know if you were done speaking. I don't want to cut you off here.
No.
Well, with the piece is interesting, right? This
Yeah.
one yeah, because there are two ways I think of it, and you touched on both of them. Is that when people think of peace, they mean being sort of still, like you mentioned,
Right.
balanced, right? But as you and I have talked about in so many other conversations, when you are balanced like that, you're not moving forward. Right, it's
Right.
kind of like your first state,
Right.
your first martial arts that you teach is okay, neutral, balance, and then from there you know how to move forward.
Right.
And then in order to move forward, you have to go out of balance.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it introduces the second sort of way of being at peace in my mind, which is awareness.
Right.
Like when you're aware whether or not you are still or you're moving forward. And that's what you kind of call that sort of gliding, where that's how I hear it, is when you're aware that reality is basically always in motion. That's how it evolves and grows. And that constant evolution is actually peace, because it's not going to stop. Right. Like you can think of, I went, and many people talk about how they like to sit by a very calm river that's not moving, and that's very peaceful. And I just think, if you think about all the microbes in there that are basically fighting for survival, it's not peace, it's very chaotic.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Exactly.
you can approach peace both ways, where it's just the awareness, or it's the, okay, let me sit and be still, but you cannot just be still, like something's still moving or changing.
Yeah. Just to get us into more trouble, this world is a world of violence. It's a world, and it's a world of change. And so we could say change is violent or change is peaceful, whatever way you want to look at it. But it is a world of violence and of death. Yeah, and death simply means the end of what I call an equation. You're born and you die. Okay. The end of the equation is inherent in the beginning. And so your death is imminent in the sheer fact you're born, right? And so that's true for everything. In other words, the chance to not oppose it, to go in opposition to what would be called the order of the universe, actually would present itself as a sort of peace, an inner peace, an inner stillness, and so the peace only can reside inside yourself. That's what it amounts to, and all that means is, to me, is that for some reason you have entered in what we call a null point or a still point, and always say, enjoy it while it lasts. You know,
No,
because it's going to change, and that's the thing
it's
of
going to change.
yeah, and that's the thing about let's say you've done something or engaged in something, and you experience a sense of joyfulness and happiness and peacefulness, right? It's like, how long does that last? Nobody ever talks about. You know, it's literally fleeting, right? The ice
Hmm.
cream, the watermelon, the sundaes, the hot dogs. I don't care what it is, and you
The
check
text
them.
message from your crush.
Yeah, something, right? Or
Yeah.
from your ex. But anyway, it's like that peacefulness does not translate into long term, and it's very odd because the negative experiences can go on forever because you re-engage them, you relive them, you drop out of current reality and move back into the past. And it truly is, the past is dead at one level, but it's also there to teach you. So we don't place inordinate value. We recognize the past, we value the experiences, but we don't engage in negativity to the point of epigenetic change in our own conscious, our own body, this, that, and the other. That's an important idea. So peacefulness might be something that can be attained. I don't know that you can find it, okay?
Yeah.
Because of so much of the rest of that map of consciousness is also engaged. And that's the deep understanding is the rest of the universe is having at it. You're just, as Saint Bon Jovi said, play your role. Right?
Yeah.
Don't play no games because you'll give love a bad name. It's like
Yeah.
there's some severe spirituality in that statement by Bon Jovi.
Like you
People
say.
understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you
So,
say, these concepts are found in just about everything you can experience:
oh yeah.
literature, music, movies.
Hmm.
Um, but peace is it's a fascinating topic. And we've talked about, at least in my mind, the two ways you can approach it, right? It's the whole idea of being still, or the whole idea of just being aware and just being peaceful, that change is the constant. Death is, like you talked about, is imminent. You can't avoid it. And in my book, I describe it as part of transformation and change. Like when
Hmm.
something dies, it's transforming and changing from its old ways to a new way. If you attend a lecture, or if you listen to us speak, the old you basically is dying, right? Because
Right.
you're
Hmm. Yes.
yeah, you're being exposed to new information, expressed in a different way, the way I speak, the way Randy speaks. And so the you that was before this conversation started is no longer. You're basically transformed and transitioned.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but about peace, when you talk about the fact that enjoy it while you can once you attain it on our planet, I discuss it in my book in a unique way. I talk about how heaven, which is our ideal for peace and love and nothing bad
Hmm.
happens, I say heaven is likely boring, because there's no everything is so peaceful and joyful, and after a while you're like, I need some shit in my life.
Yeah.
let, let me go to
It's
earth,
a,
where
uh,
everything's not just readily available and everyone's not just happy, and you can appreciate that, because if heaven were so perfect all the time, this is just a theory, right? If heaven were just, why would you leave to come here? I- If not
it's
for the lore,
yeah.
to
No.
experience some like crazy something, you
No,
know?
you have given the exact reason why you don't want to be there. Okay, it's
Yeah,
died, been there, and let's say nothing happens there. It's a complete absence of effort, of engagement. We could stay on these forever. Energy is off the charts, but that's it. And so, again, David talked about this world may be purgatorial in nature. So what? It may be warfare is the highest form of engagement, and boy,
exactly.
that'll get people excited. But
Well, I
it doesn't
mean,
have to be country to country or person to person.
no, it
Okay.
doesn't.
It's
Um,
just the war is in yourself. It's internal warfare, right? So
Thank you, Randy.
yeah,
So again, this is gonna get people on our case, but I talk about this with family and friends. I
yeah,
go, remember, the outside is a reflection of the internal. Every day, your immune system is going to war with foreign bodies.
yeah. It's killing things.
It's killing all kinds of stuff. That's why you're not constantly sick. Like that's what the earth life experience is. It's
Yeah.
battle. And every day you're battling as well. You want to change something. If you start a business, you're going to war really. You're battling the status norm, the status quo. You say, I want to change the way things are done. So we're always fighting. And
Yeah.
Dr. Hawkins even talks about how one of the benefits for wars is that, like everything else, it's a pathway to enlightenment, right? Because we talked about if you're about to die, like death is like the quickest way to awaken, you know. And so
Oh yeah.
if you're in the face of danger and you're there trying to kill somebody who's trying to kill you, let's say it happens, like there's that's a pathway for enlightenment.
Yes.
And then
Yes.
also most people, it also talks about how it's a transition, right? Pride, and you're going
Yeah.
up from pride because so nothing is sort of isolated, and then that's that awareness piece that I talk about is if you recognize that nothing's isolated and all of these are quote unquote playing your role, not giving love a bad name,
Yeah.
you kind of like, oh, okay, I'm at peace with that.
Yes. I'll tell you something. Another transformative thing. Uh, I used to fight in grade school. I mean, from first day of school on, a kid hit me with a baseball bat, from behind. so, so I engaged in violent behavior, I'll put it that way. And I was what we call good at it, but untrained. Okay. So I went to Master George Ng. It's a Supreme Grandmaster George Ng now. He's the highest ranked one in China. Still alive, great teacher, my greatest teacher in martial arts. And I went to him and he said, "Why do you want to study martial arts?" And I said, "I want to learn to fight." Okay. 30 years later, I would have made the comment, "I want to learn to not fight." But
Mm,
so not fighting would be some sense of peacefulness. Okay.
mm-hmm,
But fighting is something you should be really, really good at. You should be able to fight the common cold. You should be able to fight insanity. You should be able to fight depression. You should be able to fight anything, let's say the under 200s on Hawkins chart. And you should be able to fight it well and with a lot of energy, which you don't have if you're under 200. And um, so those concepts of learning to fight, if you're going to have an immune system, it should be really, really good at fighting. If you're going to have a psychological interaction with other humans, it doesn't need to be that of a stance of a fighter, but that of one of peaceful balance, so that when the fight comes, you can defend yourself. How about that? And so all interactions contain we call the seed of violence. That's that yin yang symbol, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And even peacefulness contains then what happens afterwards. You go in or you go out. Now, one of the things I teach as far as peacefulness is very simple. I teach it to all my business people, and is to take a pause. And a pause is to create an artificial break in the flow of the universe, meaning at 10:30 in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just blank out 10 or 15 minutes. Don't do anything. And that becomes a peaceful state for you to then re-engage the warfare that's going to happen, if nothing else, just because you took a break and everybody else didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
how wars start. Yeah.
Yeah.
In other words, no matter what you do or don't do, right? Uh, and so the difference with me is I wanted to engage, right? If it's going to be war, I trained some people in warrior arts, we'll call them, boxing, this, that, and the other, special forces. And one of the things I teach them is I'm not you're trying to avoid a fight. I'm looking for one. And in other words, if I'm going to engage my immune system, I want to engage it. I'm looking for that war, for that virus, for that cold, for whatever they think they can throw at me. It's like, bring it on, let's go. That's a difference in attitude. It's the attitude one should have towards life. It's, in
Hmm.
other words, I'm going to engage it. I'm not going to withdraw from it. Except for those little pauses that we introduce just to kind of upset the flow of the universe. Everybody wants to get in the flow of it. I want to get out of it long enough to be able to stick your head up and look around. We'll call that being able to run up and down the map of consciousness and find out where I can place myself to the greatest benefit
Hmm.
of myself and others, we would call
And
it.
yep. Yeah.
And so, and that requires you to be able to be mobile on the map of consciousness, like what we talked about early on. We all express ourselves through all those levels, but not necessarily with awareness. And so to bring awareness to each of those levels is to listen to yourself, is to see yourself, is to look at other people and see them, to listen to other people and actually listen to them. They'll educate you. This is the greatest education in the world. Your own body, your own conscious, and this universe. Man, the potential is unlimited. It's infinite. So,
Unlimited. Randy,
yeah,
man, you said so many things there. One of the things you said that brought back some I want to fight, but not
yeah,
really fight memories for me is the yin yang sign. I
yeah,
remember the day I had my awakening. I got into one of my coworkers' office and I was telling him about the balance. I was like, the universe is always in balance, right? And you cannot tilt it one way permanently. It'll just shift. It has to, and
right,
that's how it evolves. And I drew that yin yang sign. And this was somebody who was a staunch Christian, not Catholic, just a staunch Christian. They were once
yeah,
Catholic and no longer. And the person got so mad at me and told me to get out of his office with these devilish drawings and stuff and wanted nothing, which is kind of it was really beautiful for me to see that, just like a difference in levels of consciousness following my awakening and then trying to express the joy that I was experiencing in that
yeah.
moment. And I was making somebody mad, right?
you,
And then kind of
you, wait, you were interfering with the peacefulness he had attained at being unpeaceful.
tell me about it.
So, yeah, how
that's
dare you?
that's one of those things. Yeah. He was at peace with where he was. And I was like, there's more
Exactly.
to it. And he was like,
Yeah,
no, get away. I don't
yeah,
want. So
right.
that's the beauty of life. It's unavoidable. And you could be at peace with that, right? Be at peace being a
Yeah,
jerk.
yeah.
It's just
No,
so yeah,
yeah, that's exactly true.
yeah.
So,
And then the other thing you said, which is interesting to me, because I just thought about this 2 days ago. So that would have been June 14th, depending on when you're watching this, June 14th, 2022. I was driving to the office and I was just thinking about how at noon Eastern time or noon, wherever you are, right? The sun is supposed to be directly overhead so that the shadow is not stretched out from you, right? It's kind of,
right.
there's an
Hmm.
alignment between the light, the you, and then sort of the shadow side. So I kind of used reason to say, oh, that's really when there's the best balance. So it makes sense to always meditate from 11:30 so that if you get that level of stillness 20 minutes, 30 minutes in, you're going to hit the noon with the
Hmm.
balance and everything. And then after that, after noon, right, the shadow is going to start to protrude itself. And then there's going to be sort of information that you need to work on. But in my mind, I just thought, if you were perfectly still, that other level of peace because of meditating at noon, that would be great because you would have this alignment. Everything would be aligned. All your shadow work prior to noon would be healed. And then you would now be aware of the shadow work afternoon. And then you can now like go into the world with this newfound knowledge. It's kind of like just like, I'm going to try this and see what happens.
No, that's it's a perfect way to it's a perfect way to relate. We find balance in relationships. That's the idea of a relationship. Oh, I'm gonna find my complement, my soulmate, my blue flame, my
Twin flame.
yeah, queen. I mean, it just goes on ever. What you've done is introduced an instability. You have not created balance. Uh, so it's a fascinating concept that you would find it, because peace actually finds you. Joyfulness, you can have a stance that I want joyfulness, or I'm going to be joyful. And then we see if the universe actually comes up with it. And then peace actually occurs in the moments after joyfulness. Like I said, I got the ice cream, I got the job or something. There's this elation. There's another E word that goes on. And the elation comes from an elevated level of consciousness and an elevated level of energy that you release that you've been holding in tension. So peacefulness in some ways is a release of tension. It's a release of the energy you've been, the disconnect energy, or there's another word for it, but dissonance. The
Dissonance.
energy
Okay.
you develop through dissonance, meaning non-relational to your environment or to yourself, becomes cumulative, and then you seek ways to release it. And you can release that by being joyful and happy, or you can release that by looking for something to kill or hurt. So,
I shouldn't laugh at that.
yeah,
I'm
I know,
sorry.
but all
Yeah.
you got to do is look at the news and say, we'll name names of Putin and a few others in the universe. Maybe find some joy and turn around and bombing people and shooting people. And it's not something I share. you know, it's a it's not something I want to entertain, and I can't even imagine why you would, because it's at such an extreme low level of consciousness, right? So no
Yeah.
matter how intelligent you are, it doesn't mean you're conscious, right? And it doesn't mean your consciousness extends to including what we call higher precepts of peacefulness, lovingness, God, whatever you want to throw in there, right?
Yeah.
But definitely a scale of consciousness applied to all the actions going on the planet right now would give you a better perspective, relating to a better balance, relating to less negative consciousness, within yourself. So,
Yeah. No, you're right, Randy. It's it, it's it's interesting too with joy, not joy, sorry, with peace that we're talking about. Some of the things that I wrote down that Dr. David Hawkins talks about in his book, which before I say, I have to say, if you have the opportunity to get your hands on some of these DVDs and watch it, please do, because you're going to get a whole other side that is just not feasible to put in a book with all these
exactly.
topics. Yeah, right. It's very different. Plus, again, you get to like it's just this little guy with silly
Yeah.
jokes. It's nice to listen to.
I've tried to
Um,
do well on that.
yeah,
So,
but with peace, this is interesting. He talks about the subject versus the object. You being the subject or object of anything sort of disappears. Like there's no difference. Not that it disappears, but you
right,
realize that you're both the object, and that
right.
speaks to me as the I am everything kind of thing, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
I experienced with the awakening, and I saw that the car that I drive was really an expression of me. There was a I could see, it was really weird, Randy. I could see this pocket of air we call wind moving
Mm-hmm.
and coming and like slapping my face and turning my face to the left, and I just followed this pocket of air as it came and moved my face and then hit a bunch of brushes and trees and
Yeah.
moved its leaves as well, and I could see it as, oh my god, that's me. I'm the air on the clouds. So there was, for that brief moment, right, a disappearance of me being sort of separate from all of this and recognizing that, oh, I am just all of this expressed in unique ways. um
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
yeah.
I explain it as that's a state of absorption, what you were in,
Yeah.
and as opposed to a state of absence. When you're locked in your mind, in your own thoughts, you're in a state of absence of the universe, And when you absent your own mind, your own emotions, then you're in a state of absorption. You actually can take in what the universe is presenting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're absent, drugs, alcohol, high fevers, comas, severe depressive states, anxiety states, those are all when you're absenting yourself from the universe. And they scare me. I don't want to do that. It's like somebody went to the trouble of making this whole world, and I'm all for it. Like, yay. You know, it's like bring it on. Let's remember, I'm looking for a fight, right? I'm not
Yeah.
looking to just lay down and let it roll over me. And so, but a state of absorption becomes a very high state of consciousness. Okay, even this whole map could be. You go out from engagement at the lowest levels of 100% engagement in that idea or that thought or level of consciousness into an absorption of all levels. And to me, that would represent a high state of attainment to be able to include everything we've talked about, everything David talks about. So,
Yeah. Here's a fascinating thing, and I'd like to get your uh, thoughts on this. One thing I also noted here is that life tends to move a lot slower. So life moves in slow motion when you're at peace. Can you speak to that a little bit?
yeah, it's there's in martial arts, this internal martial arts. We teach there's a state you enter into where it's like you think before you act. And then there's a state of acting. And then there's a state of acting before you think. In other words, you're acting ahead of time. You're not reacting. Like most people lead a reactive life. So an active life is where you're acting out ahead of all the forces that are going on. In other words, somebody throws a punch at you, you're already blocking it. You didn't have to think about it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You throw a punch knowing where they're going to be, not where they are. So it's a very intuitive internal martial art to understand that. And so peacefulness, in a certain sense, gives us that same state of consciousness. It allows us to expand outward in time or space. And there's a thing in martial arts called time dilation. And that is where time actually slows down. And if you look at time as a construct that is only exhibitable through human consciousness, then you get into a whole big thing about whether time is slow or fast. If you're in a painful state, time is very slow. If you're in a joyful state, it's very fast. And so that acceleration in some ways occurs at levels of consciousness about whether time moves fast or slow. Now, the trick becomes is once you go above 500, you have what we call mobility. You can slow time up or slow time down or speed it up. It's literally an exercise we give in martial arts. Okay,
Yeah.
so again, it's something rarely taught. Nobody. I don't know many other teachers out there that have had that experience or that teaching of learning how to accelerate or decelerate time. So,
Yeah. The way, I mean, I discuss it in my book and how, depending on what you're doing and your level of engagement in that activity, right, time seems to sort of not be a factor. I can remember many a time I would show up at work and be so focused on what I'm doing, and I'd put my head up. It'd be noon, and
oh
before we even
yeah,
before we started recording today, I
yeah,
said the same thing. Or anybody
yeah,
who's watching this right now, if you just think back to when you first heard about COVID, and you're like, "Where is 2 years gone?" You know, like all of a sudden, time doesn't really have a factor in the experience that you've had. Or if you have kids who are old or graduating, and you think, "Oh, Um, it's weird how you see how time moves really quickly, uh, or like you say, when you're in a state of pain or you're suffering and you want to get out of it very quickly, it seems
Right.
to stand still. Um,
Yeah. David said something very interesting in one of his lectures or books. He said, you really aren't any age. You only are experiential at this moment. And so uh, you, at a certain level, don't have cumulative moments. You have cumulative memory that is very selective and very mutable. And so your age is literally this moment.
mhm.
It's an interesting concept. You're not, I'm not 73 years old. I'm at this moment, Randy, and that statement has no age to it. Do you see what I mean?
I do.
Uh, it's a very subtle understanding of time,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, I tell everybody that if you read this and you pick a level of consciousness, courage, or love, or peace, or whatever, they're very short as far as your understanding. Let's say you have a short level time of understanding, but it also serves as a portal or entry point to a very expansive universe if you want to go in that direction. The amount of knowledge behind each one of these is phenomenal. Just like peace, we could talk about it for hours and probably still not get there. So,
Yeah. I'm
right.
trying to make sense of that idea that you are experiential. When I'm thinking about it, it feels to me as though it's building on the at least the thought that time isn't really real. If you are always, if you have always been and you will always be, right? Um, the absence of time or the whole idea that everything is happening now, there there there's if you've always been, what is 10 years ago versus, right? You just can't
Yeah.
perceive that. And so at that point, then to me, if you're going off of that, then the idea that I'm really not 37 years old makes sense. It's like I'm just experiencing um, an awareness, a limited awareness of myself in this everlasting self of me.
Yeah. No. If
Right.
without you, the universe doesn't exist. That's a
Mm-hmm.
truism. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the things is I learned all this. Remember, I told David I already know all this. I learned it from country and western music. I learned it from Chicago. Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care? You see, that's the words from Chicago wrote in a song, and then it just goes on and on from there. Uh, about we use time. It is a construct. It is a construct of consciousness that we are involved in, either by choice or not, mostly by not choice. To have a body is to engage in time, but
Mm-hmm.
you can have a physical age. That's what everybody relates to. Hey, how old are you? And at one point in my life, I was very contrary, we could say, and I would go, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, psychically,
Oh
help
yeah,
me
you
out here.
could.
Which one do you want
Which
to
one?
know?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Because emotionally, I may be rating right down there in early
yeah,
teenage years, and if you're not ready to deal with that, I understand, right?
yeah. That's the
So
whole
teenage humor,
act your
right?
age, not your shoe size type of. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And and so you look at I apply this to world leaders, by the
Oh
way.
yeah.
It's I jump out there and calibrate and take a look at everything going on in the world. And this person very intelligent. Well, we could say an IQ quotient. We could give a number to
Mm-hmm.
that. How about an emotional quotient? Well, they have that language. But how about mental, meaning relationships, not the mind? And a mental quotient, a mental scale how you relate to others and relate to this universe becomes far more important than what your physical age is, right? And of course we find that in sometimes in young people, they relate very well. We say they're very mature, right? And then we could see a lot of the leaders of this planet and say, well, I know they're more mature. And that's a personal observation, not a judgment on anybody's part,
Yeah.
right? And if any of those world leaders want to engage me in a conversation, they're welcome to call.
Randy's ready to
So,
fight, right? Randy's ready to fight. Bring
yeah,
it.
exactly.
Um, what's
Yeah.
interesting, Randy, is
So,
like with the kids who act very mature, we say, "Oh, that's an old soul," right? Like that's an old soul.
yeah.
But there's, I forget who it was, and I apologize. This is someone who had a near-death experience, and he's on. If you go check, well, there's so many people who have had near-death experiences. But I was watching his
Right.
interview, and he talked about during his near-death experience when he had crossed over just recently, and they were kind of reminding him about what life on Earth is and the different roles we play with the bodies that we select and the lessons and or whatnot that we choose to learn. That your level of soul growth does not necessarily translate to your leadership position on the planet. And he said to him
Right.
that that was very devastating because on the other side, and if you read Dr. David Hawkinson's book, not David Hawkins, Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls,
Mm-hmm.
he kind of talks about how you have soul guides, but these soul guides are basically guiding you because they have gone through that experience themselves, right? It's kind of, they've experienced everything that they're kind of teaching you, and before they become your guide, they've gone through it. But here on planet Earth, you could be a new soul, but choose to learn something by being the president of the country, right? And so, and so he
Right.
was very taken aback by
Yeah.
that. He said it was devastating to him that, and no knock to leaders, right? We're all playing a sort of cohesive role for each other, supporting each other, and everything like that. But essentially, on this planet, you can, quote unquote, be a certain age, but not reflect your level of sort of conscious awareness and growth. And you could
Yeah.
hold a certain
Yeah.
position within the universe, within the planet, and
Oh, yeah.
not reflect
Yeah.
your. So I thought that that was fascinating.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is because a couple of things. You know, when I look at the activities of all humans on this planet, there's only one question comes up is, what the hell was God thinking? So, just to get us into more
Yeah, of
trouble.
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my idea. That's what I tell people. And then the second thing is, I do not exhibit any negative states of consciousness,
Just
just
so
so
you
you
know,
know.
yeah.
But just jealousy, though, comes in at one point, and that is people that have near-death experiences. I died like 7 times. Nobody wanted to talk to me, right? God wouldn't have me. Hell wouldn't have me. Kicked me back out into this world. And I'm like,
Well,
what? I was available. I wasn't doing nothing else. Like, you couldn't send a few guides or angels or virgins or something around just to kind of like have a nice little conversation. I mean, I really felt ignored, and I feel really jealous when these people tell me about all these things that go on when they die,
let it
right?
out, Randy.
And
Let it
so,
out.
yeah. So I don't know what ticket they bought, but I want a different ticket than the one I
Hey, just
have.
think about it this way. You didn't get
So,
drafted for a couple of reasons, right? You didn't get drafted by either side, right? Because
right,
because
exactly.
you were already too good. You knew it all.
I
There
don't
you go.
know.
Problem. So we just,
Like I
yeah.
said, what was the universe thinking? I don't know. I've got some problems, and I was willing to discuss them. You know, I've always said I have a few questions after I leave this
Yeah.
planet. Right. So
Write them down,
I
Randy.
think
Write it down.
they didn't want to argue with
My
me.
cheeks are hurting. True story.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Golly, I get wound up about
Uh,
that.
well,
Anyway,
at least,
so much for
yeah.
peacefulness,
So much
right?
for
If that was
peacefulness.
a state of peacefulness, you can keep
Yeah.
it, right?
Well,
There's nothing there and nothing going on, and humans, like nature, abhors a vacuum, and we want something to happen.
of course.
So all this false talk of, "Ooh, I want peace," they are lying. That is all there is to it. It
Yeah.
is. They have no
Yeah.
idea
Yeah.
of what this universe is
Yeah.
based on.
You got to
So
clarify the type of piece you want, right? Whether it's the I'm just sitting
yeah,
still or the awareness piece. Because if it's the awareness piece,
right.
it's not on planet Earth. Sorry.
Yeah,
Like, so I mean, sorry, if it's the
right.
just sitting still, it's not on planet Earth. There's always some shit going
Yeah,
on. Okay.
right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah, and then we go, ain't it
yeah.
great? Right.
So I mean,
Mhm.
we're on a roll, annoying people today.
Yeah.
So let's the
Yeah. Good.
last. This is the last piece. Before I even ask this, many months ago, this was December of 2021 when I first introduced the idea of
hmm
us talking about the map of consciousness, and you're like, okay, it's gonna take 8 hours to do it all. And I'll be honest, I
Yeah.
was skeptical. I go, what are you talking about? I read through this stuff. We'll go over it. It's just so many levels. We'll talk about this 1 hour and a half, and we'll be done. And here we are finishing number 6. We just talked about peace this entire conversation, and we have enlightenment left. And then I don't know what we can say about 1,000 really. So I think it'll be, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you add up all, I mean, it's like 7. It'll be 7 episodes, but we've definitely
Yeah.
spent way more than 8 hours, conversating, and
Right.
then the time to edit. So kudos to you there. But before we end,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, it's just that's an example of time dilation. You say, well, I want to go do this. And I go, well, it take about 8 hours. It's like that knowledge, that timeline is the way I explain it, is already there as soon as you recognize it. The recognition comes in the form of I want to do this or I want to go here or whatever. Is that you are attaching yourself to a timeline. And to me, like when you say let's do this, and I say 8 hours, in my mind I like, okay, I have to block out like 8 or 10 hours for to go through
Mhm.
this. And so when I agree to do the interviews, I'm agreeing to that 8 or 10 hours. I'm agreeing to where it goes. I'm agreeing to the whole timeline. And so this happens. I think some people should be more aware of. It's when you get married, you're agreeing to a timeline, right? It's when somebody goes, you want to go to the movie. Whatever happens in going to and being at and coming home to that movie and the afterwards is included in I want to go to a
Mhm.
movie or I'm going to
Mhm.
go.
Mhm.
If you want peacefulness, it's the same thing. You're trying to gauge in a timeline that the universe might not agree with or might not support. That'd be the best
Yeah.
way. So this one, the universe supported us talking about this for a length of time, and hopefully people will be able to gain a little better understanding of it. One of the things that occurs is we say you can read a book, but having a teacher sometimes is for the subtleness, for the things that are not teachable through a book. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, so that's where discussion comes in, and that's why I was all for having a discussion about this as a way to mentor or support those that are interested in reading Dr. Hawkins' works. So that
Absolutely.
okay.
And so before we close, the last piece of information we want to share with this level 600 piece has to do with the fact that many people transcend formal religion at this level, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what I have written down. Is like when you attain a certain level of peace, you're like, oh, I don't, I don't need religion anymore. Um, and
Right.
can you speak to why you think that is?
Yes, it's actually it's what to call a subtle change in consciousness. Uh, Sometimes referred to as elevation. But remember when we talked about absorption and
Mm-hmm.
absence? You become absorbed in it to the point that you have kind of like filled yourself up with it, and once you've done that, then hello. So once you've filled yourself up through absorption, the absence of that information or idea doesn't bother you anymore. And so religion in the same way becomes a limit. You have defined the universe in a limited scope. Any religion, all religions, and so that's the best way to look at it, is that any religion is limited in its scope as far as its understanding of the universe. Otherwise, there would only be one. And so when you're not limited to one viewpoint, from one history, from one geomorphic influence, and that's all religions are geomorphic, then once you become what we call a whole earth person or a whole universe person, is that you can include a religion, but not to the exclusion of all others. You can include life on earth, but not to the exclusion of all others. You can exclude the world as Roland or Randy, but not to the exclusion of all others. And so you go from what's called exclusion to inclusion. You go from absorption to absence. And absence, of course, is where we make room, remember the pausing, for all other information to come to us. So we declare our openness in a state of peace, you might say, in a state of elevation. I declare my openness to knowing more or learning more. That to me is how it works.
Yeah.
So
Wow, that was so well put. I mean, no surprise there, but it really was very well put, and it speaks to, again, what I've said many times, is once you tap into this, like and let me just say, an expanded field of consciousness, excuse me there, you begin to see that information everywhere. So with me in particular, it was, I saw the commonality of the information trying to be expressed through the different religions in the world. And and
yes,
so, and what you said is very important, is when you transcend, or at least for me, like if I say I transcend the need to go to church regularly, it's not because I don't see its value. It's just because,
exactly.
it's like you graduate high school and you don't need to go back there after you've gotten your maybe a master's degree or bachelor's degree from college. But you recognize how valuable high school was in preparing you for the bachelor's degree in college plus, but there's no need to go back there and sort of as a student, essentially, right? So
yeah. I explain it as all religions are revelation. Okay. And the thing about revelation is just like in transcending a level of consciousness, you go from one jump to the next. At each point, there's more information. Okay. But one of the things that I also explain is if you have a religion, or if you're engaged in an under 200 conscious level of consciousness, guilt, apathy, shame, any of those, anger, then hang on to it. you don't need the rest of the world. Now, the question is whether the universe is going to let you stay there or not, right? So we say in the face of revelation, if there's been one, obviously there will be more.
yeah,
In other words, to focus on one single revelation in your life does not allow for what we call constant revelation. And that's one of the hallmarks of once you pass about 600, is there's this constant revelation about life and the universe and literally the whole show, okay? Because you're open and you're no longer limited to one belief or to one form of knowledge or one form of expression. And so we can have favorites. People should have a favorite religion if that's what brings them peace. And that's another aspect of all religions. They all talk about it, and then since we're making people mad, look at how many people have been killed because of religion in the world, right? Throughout history, right? And so, if peace is what I'm looking for, religion might not be the way to get there. And if peace is what I'm looking for, then warfare might not be the way to get there. In the same way, politics and 90% of human activity, right? getting married might not be peaceful. I mean, I hate to break it to people. So we won't go there because that'll really get excited.
I think we've caused enough trouble
So
today. Uh,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
but Randy, as always, it's so great to talk with you. It's so great to revisit the different levels of Dr. David Hawkins's Map of Consciousness. Tell us again about what's going on in Sedona on October 23rd.
Yeah, October 23rd at 1:30 in Sedona, Arizona, at the Creative Life Center. You can go to Randy Veitenheimer or Energy Doctor, spelled with a K, and I have links and stuff posted. And sometimes I've had people say, "What is it?" And I go, "Well, I'm going to relate like kind of like the soul's journey. I'm going to relate what it meant for me to go there, how I got to actually go there, which is quite a story, because it basically involves the whole universe about how I ended up at that first lecture he gave on power versus force, and then the impact of what he taught and what I continue to try to expound on, and then the effects it's had in the healing work I do and the businesses that I've helped, and how introducing all of that has changed not only my life, but thousands of people. Because I laughed one day, David and Susan and I were talking, and she said, "There's this kind of anomaly in our book sales." And I go, "Well, what's that?" She goes, "Well, some reason in Oklahoma that we have this sharp spike in the number of power versus forces that are sold. Do you know why?" And I go, "Well, everybody comes in contact with me has to read it. So I either pass them out like candy or tell them go online and find it or something, right?" And part of that is self-serving. I want to be able to have a conversation. I want to be able to have a conversation that includes kind of all levels of consciousness, all levels of expression of who that person is. And I want to be able to explore that. I want to be able to engage that. So be you.
Be you.
Right?
And the most difficult question of the day, Randy, in acknowledging that part of you expressing to people the need for them to buy and read Power versus Force as being self-serving, are you at peace with that?
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
There you go. That's the show.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the show.
Talk about introducing a destabilizing influence on your life. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Power versus Source should make you think. It should make you expand. That's the best language. Forget elevation. It's the idea to expand to include. Remember, absorption or absence. We want to absorb all of it. A state of absorption is a state of contemplation. It's a state of meditation. It's a state of relating. All of that is contained in there. And that's the expansionary influence of David's work. So
yeah.
So.
Indeed. Again, thank you, guys. Thank you too for watching. If again you're enjoying, leave comments, ask questions, subscribe to the YouTube channel, share the video with friends and family who need to find a way to be at peace with themselves somehow, right? Share the video.
Exactly.
And Randy, man, be great as always. And I'll do the same on my end.
I love it. Thank you very much for the conversation. All right.
Yes, you're welcome, my friend. All right, guys. Create an amazing day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right. Goodbye.